Hey, welcome back to the channel, or if you're new here, welcome to the channel. I'm Nick, and I make videos about things I like. Today, that's more cozy games you should try that you probably haven't heard of before. So, without any further delay, let's get into the games. Isla, a Frosty Glide is a game that hasn't fully released yet, and there is, as of yet, no official release date. However, from what I've seen in the demo you can check out right now, I sure hope that release date is soon. Let's start with the good takeaways I got from the demo. Firstly, the premise. You're a teenage witch with the goal of reaching the top of the mountain on your own. The premise is much like a short hike. It's a contemplative adventure to a summit along which you will learn about yourself and the world around you. Where this game differs, rather significantly in my opinion, is in the mechanics. You're given a skate broom, which is basically the deck of a skateboard with the end of a broom, and unsurprisingly, you magically hover around the environment on your skate broom. And the mechanics themselves are fairly simple on the face of it. It's a platformer where you hover around instead of walking. Okay, fairly simple, except the options that you have for advancement of your abilities with something like a magic broom are vastly higher than simple jumping mechanics. Now, this could be a double-edged sword, and that could very easily be turned into a bad thing if the devs get too caught up in all the cool ways that they can let you skate around the environment. It's very difficult to hit the right balance of complexity and simplicity when it comes to platformers. A game like Mario shows that pretty well. Modern Mario games aren't anywhere near as simple as their retro-era counterparts, with all kinds of new abilities and ways to shake up the formula, but they never let it get too complicated. Every level is still easy enough to parse, and the mechanics never get in your way. Other platformers, on the other hand, tend to struggle with that balance, and it will be interesting to see if this team is able to get that balance right or not. Whether they do or don't, though, I love the premise of this game. I love games that let you live out some kind of witchy fantasy, whether that's brewing potions, flying around the sky on a magic broom, or casting spells. There's just something really cozy about that central conceit. And Magic Worlds have so much potential for creating that perfect cozy feeling too, because a lot of the hallmarks of cozy games center around candles, cold climates, and many times the struggles of growing up. Witches and witchy things offer the perfect setting to explore those ideas. And I think this game centering around a teenage witch will make for, at the very least, a great world surrounding the player. I don't know if they're going to focus all that much on explicit story, or if that's going to be mostly background stuff where you just get bits and pieces from scraps of paper around the world, but if they do, I think there's a lot of potential there that they could absolutely take advantage of. However, I do want to touch briefly on a complaint that I have after playing the demo, and while it's not necessarily game-breaking, I did find it extremely frustrating, and that is the camera. In-game cameras are notorious for being difficult to make fluid and invisible, and I think third-person platformers struggle with this particularly. Being able to see what you're doing is so important in a platformer. Being able to line up your jump, or even just getting a sense of your surroundings, can make or break the feeling of a platformer, and when you're placed into a 3D environment, that is especially true. Unfortunately, the camera in the demo I played really got in my way, and I'm not someone who normally complains about in-game cameras, but as I'm sure you've noticed in the B-roll, it's pretty bad. Lowering the sensitivity helped a bit, but not enough to claim the problem went away. This is something I hope they're able to fix, because without that one glaring issue, I think the game has potential. They have enough avenues for upgrading your character and their abilities, and the platforming, I think, has enough motivation behind it that if they're able to get the camera under control, they could really build a great fanbase here. I really hope they're able to fix that for the final release, because I want to see this game do well. I really think it has legs, and I would hate for the camera to be the one thing holding it back. But now, let's not let that hold us back from getting on to our next game. Cairn is a really interesting game. I've heard it be equated to Bennett Foddy's Getting Over It, as well as something like Jusant, and I can totally see where that comparison comes from. Now, to be clear, it's nowhere near as frustrating as something like Getting Over It, but it is clearly a more meditative experience like that, more than Jusant. As I've said before when talking about Jusant, that game has a really interesting rock climbing mechanic, and it's a really fun, gamey take on rock climbing. However, it's not what I would call realistic or sim-y. I would classify Jusant's mechanics as much more kind of low stakes and chill, whereas Cairn is much closer to a rock climbing sim. It's not a sim, to be clear. There are plenty of mechanical conceits that take it far away from being called a true sim. However, it is far more involved than something like Jusant. The main crux of the mechanic is simple. You control each arm and leg independently, and in turn. This means that you're able to make all kinds of crazy positions with your body in order to position yourself to get a good hold on the rock. However, you can't simply hold onto the rock forever, and you will eventually run out of stamina. How quickly you run out of stamina depends on your position, so a position that has all your limbs fully outstretched is going to take a lot more effort to hold than one where you have to hold on with, say, an arm and a leg. Basically, if you think it would be hard to hold in real life, it'll take a substantial amount of stamina to hold in the game. You can, however, recover stamina if you use one of your limited amount of anchors. That way, you can hang off the rock for a second and catch your breath and regain your stamina. The core gameplay loop is really rewarding, and finding all the handholds and getting a really good position always feels great. It is, however, a very slow game, just like real rock climbing. It's a balancing act between how fast you can climb and how safely you can do it. You want to be efficient with how fast you go so you don't run out of stamina, and you want to make sure that you don't try too many crazy positions because that'll eat away at your stamina bar. But also, those crazy positions might help you get up that section of the climb faster. So it's really about balancing risk and reward, as well as managing your resources, because your climber will grow thirsty and hungry, and you need to make sure that you replenish those bars at the right time so you don't run out when you really need it. Where Jusant was really about the vibes and the world, Cairn is all about the climb. The main goal is to get to the top of this massive mountain, and while I only had a relatively short period of time with the demo, it was enough to give me a sinking feeling when I saw just how big the actual endgame goal was. Which is quite the feat, because while I would certainly describe it as a sinking feeling of dread, there is also an unavoidable feeling of anticipation and excitement at the thought as well. Basically, if you're into challenging games which really push you but don't actively hate you, and you either are a climber yourself or you're just interested in it but for whatever reason you can't participate, I think this game is going to be right up your alley. So now, onto our next game with Prodigal is a self-aware modern take on classic Game Boy Zelda games like Link's Awakening. You can expect everything from extensive fetch quest chains to dark and mysterious dungeons, to fun, interesting traversal and combat mechanics that double as problem-solving tools in the dungeons that you face in the game. The premise is that you're returning from home after having stolen from your parents and run away a long time ago. Now, after hearing word that your parents have died, you return to pay respects and reintegrate into your hometown. Given that shaky background, you need to work to regain the residents' trust in you, and in order to do that, you need to help them out with whatever they need help with. Much like the Zelda games of yore, you run around town doing various tasks for various people, who all tell you little bits about the town and overall story. After having finally completed this string of fetch quests, you find out about the existence of different dungeons around town. In order to complete each dungeon, you need to have certain upgrades and tools, and you get those by completing quests or other dungeons, just like the old Zelda games, and much of the game is exactly that, just like the old Zelda games. And I think a lot of the appeal of this particular game is that similarity. It really does feel like you're playing an alternative reality kind of satirical version of Zelda. They poke fun at the typical trappings of Zelda games like the aforementioned fetch quests, and the boss doors in the dungeons are sentient and don't always need a key, sometimes they're just lonely and decide to let you in just cuz. And the whole game has a subtle touch of much more adult themes than most Zelda games have. And I'm not talking about death and violence. Overall, Prodigal is a great time if you grew up with Zelda, or you're a more recent convert like myself, and you just can't get enough of the classic games, but you want a bit more of a modern take, or a more self-aware spin on the whole thing. There really isn't much else to say about it. It's a really great take on the Zelda formula, and aside from the art style being a slight bit difficult to read at times, it's a beautiful game, and a really faithful and I think loving take on the classic Zelda formula that we all love so much. But now we'll take it back to a bit of a more chilled out game, which, if anything, takes a bit more from Breath of the Wild than the classic Zelda games, with Thousand Threads is a game that I heard about from a viewer, actually. So if any of you have game recommendations, please do leave those in the comments, because I'm always looking for great recommendations, and you guys are always a really useful source for that. But back to the game. Thousand Threads is a chill, I would argue cozy, mail delivery sim. In fact, I think the closest comparison might be if you took Death Stranding and mixed it with Breath of the Wild. It's nowhere near as weird as Death Stranding, but the main mechanic has you walking around, talking to people you meet, and asking what they need. There is more to it than that, but generally you're just delivering one thing from one person to another somewhere else on the map. And there are dangers and obstacles that can cause you issues, but if you're the kind of gamer who prefers slow-paced, ambient games about talking to people, Thousand Threads is going to be right up your alley. You start off with just a stick and have to work for money and other items. It's not a survival crafting game, so there isn't any of that kind of progression. Instead, you do different jobs for people and get paid for those jobs. Usually it's delivering mail, but it really can be anything from taking one object to someone for someone else, or going and knocking out someone for someone else, or even conducting an investigation to try and figure out who stole something from someone else. And it's always up to you if you want to do the job or not. You can always decline the job, and if you do, you don't have to do it. The game doesn't find some convoluted way to make you do the quest anyway. They just let you say, "No, I'm good, I don't want to do it," which is kind of a nice break from larger budget games. But the gameplay itself and the world that it's set in are what make it a really great game, in my opinion. It's set in this sleepy foothills area with an extensive map and plenty of different areas to explore. It's one of those games you don't really mind not having a direct line to follow, because existing in the world is just really chill and not too stressful. That is, unless you come across a wolf pack, a bear, or a bandit, then it gets a bit more intense. But that doesn't happen all that often, and if it does, it's easy enough to either run away or stand your ground. You probably won't win against a bear, but I mean, feel free to try. But other people and wolves pose a more manageable threat. But aside from that, the world is pretty chill, and it's kind of nice to just walk around through the forest, listening to the birds chirping and the wind rustling the trees, and the music that the developers have made, which you can actually just buy the soundtrack if you like it. However, if you're less self-motivated and you get angry if a game doesn't have 100+ hours of content, then you might want to skip this one. It really relies on you being willing to go long periods of time without a clear goal and still have a good time. And the atmosphere helps a lot with that, personally. All the different biomes you can explore, they're all mostly similar in terms of their terrain, but the vibe changes substantially from one to the other. If that sounds like you though, I would definitely suggest you give it a try. It's a great game to relax with, and it's not too expensive at $20, plus it's from an indie dev, and we here on this channel love supporting indie devs. But now on to our last game, which doesn't have a demo yet. Now, I want to give a bit of a disclaimer here. I was given an early access demo of this game prior to the Steam Next Fest. However, no money exchanged hands, and all the opinions here are my own. The only thing I got access to was the demo, so I could record my own footage and show you a bit of the gameplay. Okay, now, Hotel Galactic is a Studio Ghibli-inspired hotel management game where you're tasked with rejuvenating an old intergalactic rest stop into the best darn hotel you can make it. To that end, you need to manage everything from the decor in the rooms to the duties of the staff under your employ. Now, it's not as stressful as that might sound, and I promise you, this is a cozy game, but being a management game, it's not as cozy as some other games that I've covered. It can get a tad bit stressful at times, though I suspect that's because I didn't spend enough time with it to really learn the systems and make full use of their potential. But even what I did see, I loved. I love all the freedom that the game gives you when it comes to the layout of the hotel in general. They have a really neat system for creating new rooms and placing furniture. I love the style of everything, and I'm not too upset that they don't let you take full control of the designs of the decor, because I think what they have ensures a really great consistent theme to the appearance of the game. Aside from the layout mechanics though, I think one of my favorite parts of the demo was the personality in all the characters, and that includes their designs. The team really went out of their way to give their game that iconic Ghibli feel without simply ripping it off whole cloth. I don't think for a second this game could be accused of actually ripping off Ghibli. I think they just understood the feeling and the themes in Ghibli's style and were able to replicate that feeling in their own style. That being said, there is very clear inspiration being taken from the hotel in Spirited Away, except instead of a spirit hotel, it's an alien hotel. And that brings me to the guest mechanics. Whenever you get a new guest, you have to assign them to a room. They have a preference, but you're not always able to meet their request because obviously you have a limited amount of rooms and everyone can't be in room 1. From there, you need to take care of the entertainment and food for your guests, and I found food to be where the game got the most stressful. Managing who was on waiter duty and who was in the kitchen and micromanaging everything to make sure they're doing their job, I will admit got my blood pressure rising a little bit more than I'm used to in cozy games. However, I did eventually start to get the hang of the systems, at least somewhat, and I can absolutely see how you could get into a flow in this game, and just jumping around from room to room and taking care of everyone's needs is actually quite fun, and it never lets you get bored. There are so many elements to this game, and I wasn't able to try them all in this early demo, but from what I did see, I'm really liking it. And I really hope the full release does well, because this is such a great game. Everything from the art style to the gameplay absolutely clicked with me. I love Studio Ghibli movies, and there is a shockingly small number of games that really attempt to give you that feeling, and even fewer that stick the landing. But just based on what I did get to play in the demo, if the rest of the game is this good, this might be one of those select few. But that's about all for today's video. I hope you found 1 or 2 games in here that you hadn't heard of before, and if you did and you decide to check them out, please do make sure you leave a comment about which games those were and what you think of them. But don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, happy gaming.